Well, thank you all for joining us today. We have quite a few of you joining us, and so we still have a couple hundred that are still logging in. But let me just go ahead and introduce myself, Carrie Broderson with the Greater Houston Partnerships Events and Programs team. Thank you for being here. And welcome to our virtual conversation with Senator John Cornyn. He'll be discussing the Coronavirus Aid, Relief, and Economic Security CARES Act today, and other federal stimulus programs enacted to aid businesses impacted by COVID-19. We will have a moderated discussion with Partnership Senior Vice President Taylor Landine, and he will conduct that after a few remarks from the Senator. First, I'd just like to mention that we are recording today's session, so if you had trouble logging on, or if you're on by phone, you will be able to view this in a recorded fashion on our houston.org coronavirus microsite. And we're also going to get started in a moment, but please take a moment to check your screens. I want to just run through how we're proceeding with today's event. For those that are on mobile and computer devices, you will be able to use the chat feature to indicate if you're having any technical difficulties or just provide comments to our panel. You will be in a private mode, so you'll just be corresponding with our panelists. And if you have any questions that we can answer during the program, please submit those with the Q&A tab at the bottom of your screen. We will try to get to those in a live fashion, or we will have our staff and the Senator's staff answering those questions by text, and that you will be able to see in the response section. You also can view this webisode from your View Options tab. That'll give you the opportunity to enlarge or smaller any of your views. And so I recommend checking that tab at the top of your screen to make for better viewing. So now I'd like to turn things over to Taylor Landine, Senior Vice President of the Greater Houston Partnership. And Taylor, I'll turn it over to you.
Great, thanks, Carrie, and thanks to everyone who's joined us today. We're thrilled to have Senator Cornyn with us, and we will begin that discussion momentarily. Before we bring Senator Cornyn on, I wanted to make all who have joined the call today, make you all aware of some of the steps the partnership has taken during this time that we think could be beneficial to you and your companies, both to get through this immediate crisis that's facing us today and begin thinking about recovery. So following one of the first things that we did following the stay home, work safe order that was issued by Judge Hidalgo in coordination with Mayor Turner last week was we announced the launch of the COVID-19 Houston Work Safe Company program. This effort establishes 10 principles essential businesses should follow to maintain safe on-site operations. And companies who adopt these principles are encouraged to publicly declare their pledge to do so. And we've also developed a COVID-19 Houston Work Safe Company webpage with links to the principles and a toolkit and Work Safe Company logo for you to use through your various social media properties, as well as suggested posts. So we have already had dozens of companies take their make their pledge and utilize these resources, and we hope that those on the call today will do the same. I suspect most of you on this conference are receiving our daily emails already that compiles resources, news, policy updates, and other useful information. You can sign up to receive that email by going to our website if you're not already receiving it. And we're very proud of the fact that our website, houston.org, has received the most traffic ever over the last few weeks. And we're proud to be able to deliver rich content and value to our members during these really uncertain times. One of the last things I'll mention is something that we're really excited about. On Monday, we launched what we're calling the Greater Houston Business Recovery Center. This is a business-led recovery program connecting businesses to available resources in order to help them through this difficult time. As a first step in this program, the partnership is aiming to inform its members and the broader Houston business community about federal programs and opportunities designed to help companies weather and recover from this current crisis. So in the coming weeks and months, we will continue to add resources, programming, tools businesses will need to recover. And our goal is for the Greater Houston Business Recovery Center to be the primary resource for business recovery and help businesses across our region harness every available resource to help us recover from this as quickly as possible. You can visit the Recovery Center by going to houston.org/recovery. So now let's move toward our program today. We'll bring Senator Cornyn on the line in just a moment, but first let me provide just a very brief context for our discussion. In the last month, obviously, we've all watched as Congress has responded to the COVID-19 crisis, and the most notable part of this response is now the CARES Act, which was signed just 5 days ago. And Senator Cornyn will provide an overview of that $2 trillion package, and then we'll move on to Q&A. So with that, let me move and welcome the senior senator from Texas, Senator John Cornyn. We'll get an overview of the CARES Act from you, but I wanted to say first and foremost, thank you for your leadership during this time. Thank you for what you will do for Texas in the weeks to come. And I know you want to provide an overview of the package passed last week, and then we'll move into questions. So we look forward to this discussion. And Senator Cornyn, the floor is yours.
Well, thanks, Taylor. It's good to see a Cornyn alum doing so well. They're for the Greater Houston Partnership, and it's good to be with all of you with the really the premier business association in the regions, to be sure. But this is a time of unprecedented emergency. Certainly in my lifetime, I never thought I would vote on, much less for, a $2 trillion plus spending bill. But I believe that, as President Trump has said, that the country is on a war footing and that we should approach this the way we would any other national and indeed international emergency. So we are doing everything we know we can. But my purpose here is to explain to you a little bit about what the legislation says, and then what you can do to help me make this better is to give the Greater Houston Partnership team the feedback that on whether Congress's intentions are actually being executed or whether there are gaps or other problems with the legislation. I have no doubt that when you pass a $2 trillion plus bill at warp speed, there's going to be some problems, if only with the implementation, and we're already beginning to see some of those arise. But let me get to it. We know it took less than a month when the first local cases were confirmed until we hit 1,000 cases in the Houston area. And of course, being a urban area, it seems to me this virus likes urban areas and makes it even more challenging for each of you, not only as business owners, but as employers, as parents, as neighbors, as friends, and as loved ones. And as you heard in response, the Congress has now passed 3 bills to help do 2 things. One is to fight the virus, to win that fight, which we must, but then to make sure that after we defeat the virus, that our economy can be restored, and hopefully the employers who currently exist will continue to exist and provide jobs and opportunity for hardworking Texas families. So the bill, as Taylor told you, was signed last week by the president. It's the 3rd bill. The first was an $8.3 billion piece of legislation, primarily to deal with the public health concerns. Then the 2nd bill dealt with expanding unemployment insurance coverage and designed to address more of the economic challenges. But this bill, first of all, and being a giant medical center there in Houston, you understand the importance of making sure we provide resources to our hospitals and our public health authorities that are being crushed by the weight of this workload, and the fact that they are no longer doing any elective surgery because we need the capacity in case there's a need for a surge in beds and support for people who come down with this virus. So Congress appropriated $100 billion for that purpose, and we've worked, I've done one of these calls with the Texas Hospital Association. They told us what they needed, and we've done our best to try to get it to them. When I first talked to the governor about this, he said there's two things I need. One is testing, and the other is personal protective equipment. And that is, even though there's been a huge uptick in the amount of masks, gloves, and other personal protective equipment that's needed, this is a great urgency because we need to keep our healthcare providers healthy, and so they can continue to provide services, as well as our law enforcement community. I saw a tweet from Chief Acevedo, and I told him that there was actually $85 million dedicated to first responders as part of this legislation. But overall, this includes $16 billion to increase availability of these kinds of resources. We also tried to do everything we can to cut red tape to speed up the process of advancing vaccines, to do clinical trials of existing medication that may be repurposed for this particular threat, and to help get doctors and nurses to the hardest hit areas. We know where those are now. As medical professionals and leaders at every level have encouraged us to stay home and practice social distancing, our lives have literally been flipped upside down. And those of you who have school-aged kids, obviously you know schools are closed. The travel industry is shut down. Hospitality industry as well. People are losing their jobs and paychecks, and everyone's hunkering down at home and wondering how this will all end. So the first thing we wanted to do in this latest legislation is to get cash in the hands of people who are not receiving a paycheck through no fault of their own. Again, this is unprecedented legislation, but it will provide via the IRS no later than 3 weeks from the date of the president signed it last Friday, a check for families making up to $150,000 who will receive up to $3,400 direct deposited in their account. Obviously, most of us don't have to worry about living paycheck to paycheck, but many Texans do, and particularly those working in the hospitality and service industry, which are most directly impacted. So that was the first goal. The second is to provide a strengthened unemployment insurance system and to provide additional benefits, an additional $600 a week benefit and federal benefits on top of the state portion. We've also extended the duration of unemployment insurance benefits by an additional 13 weeks, and that's good through the end of the year. We want to make sure that individuals have the resources they need to pay the bills. This is April 1st. Rent is due, mortgage payments are due, but they also need money for groceries and other expenses until the smoke clears. And when that finally happens, we want to make sure the business community is standing strong, ready to rehire these people back. Through no fault of your own, many of your businesses have been either closed or your operations dramatically shifted. And for most small businesses, it's simply not feasible to go on weeks, much less months, without money coming in the front door. And so for small businesses, that's defined under the legislation as 500 employees or less. This bill establishes $350 billion in paycheck protection, which provides 8 weeks of cash flow assistance to small businesses. These are fashioned as low interest loans. I think the Treasury just said they will bear an interest rate of 0.5%, but they can be used to cover anything from payroll costs to supply chain disruptions to rent. And if employers maintain their payroll until June, payroll, rent, and utility payments covered by the loan can be completely forgiven. So they can be a contingent grant, depending on what the employer can do feasibly. The loan amount could be up to 250% of your average monthly payroll with a maximum of $10 million. These will be available through SBA certified lenders, in other words, your local bank and credit union, and they will begin accepting applications this Friday. The actual application you'll need to take to your bank was released yesterday, and they can begin receiving and lending starting on Friday. But because it's a brand new system, obviously there are going to be a lot of questions and implementation challenges, but that's how we have to work together through all of this. But you need to have your paperwork ready at the time of the application, and that will certainly help. My website, the SBA website, the U.S. Treasury website have additional guidance for lenders and borrowers And you can always reach out to your local small business development center for technical assistance. And I'm sure the Greater Houston Partnership will be there to help. I know getting cash in hand as soon as possible is a top priority. So businesses that have applied for these SBA loans, or actually loans through SBA certified lenders, can request an emergency advance of up to $10,000 to cover expenses. In the short term, these loans are going to be critical to staying afloat, but we want to also provide for some longer term stability. If the bill temporarily increases the amount of interest expenses a business can deduct in 2019 and 2020 from 30% to 50% of taxable income. Hopefully this will increase liquidity with a reduced cost of capital so you can continue operations through this storm. For those of you who don't have access to SBA loans created by this legislation, it also provides temporary refundable employer retention credit for businesses that continue to pay their employees despite shutting down or losing a significant amount of income. I hope it will never get to this point, but this legislation also provides a simplified bankruptcy provision by raising the maximum debt threshold for eligibility so that more small and medium-sized businesses could get through this process faster and more easily if absolutely necessary. We're hoping to minimize the disruption this will have on businesses that you've worked so hard to build and avoid as many layoffs as possible. And we know you don't need any more red tape or bureaucracy. You need a lifeline, and that's what this legislation is designed to provide. So I know that this is a difficult time for everybody, but I want to assure you that I have done my best to listen to the breadth and scopes of challenges that you are up against, and we will get through this together. My staff has been in touch with many of you about the process to apply for assistance in its various forms, and I'm sure you'll get more guidance from the information we provided to Taylor so he can share that directly with you. And if I or my office can ever help, please let us know. Some of my staff will be staying on the call to hear your concerns. But once again, let me thank you, my friends with the Greater Houston Partnership, for making this call possible. And I'm happy to answer or dodge a few questions. So let me turn it back over to Taylor.
Senator Cornyn, thank you very much. We appreciate that overview. Obviously, it's a monumental piece of legislation and with a lot of complexity to it, but hopefully relief can get where it needs to get as quickly as possible during this time. So in just the last 24 hours since we've put out the invitation, we've received dozens of questions from our members, some very specific to individual situations that we obviously won't be able to cover in specific detail today, and then others more general. So let's dive right in. So before we cover some of the items around the Paycheck Protection Program and other things, let's talk specifically about the response to this situation, arguably one of the most challenging public health emergencies our country has ever faced. I wanted to spend some time talking about that broader response. We received a number of questions from those in our healthcare community, both hospital systems and more local clinics. So how does the CARES Act provide support to the healthcare system in their continued response to this pandemic?
Well, Taylor, to your point, while this is an unprecedented emergency for most of us, this is not the first pandemic that the world has experienced. And many of us are trying to learn the lessons that this virus is trying to teach us so we don't find ourselves in this position again. But to your question, we do provide a surge in healthcare resources, including $100 billion for hospitals to diagnose and treat COVID-19 patients. And that includes $275 million to expand capacity and services for rural hospitals. It also provides telehealth, expands telehealth availability. Fortunately, most people who get this virus will not have to be hospitalized, but some will, particularly elderly, people with comorbidities, underlying health problems. And many of people can be monitored at home. And so expanded telehealth will help as well. We also provide $1.5 billion in grants for state and local public health authorities to ensure there are enough resources to expand testing and procure the necessary personal protective equipment. And it will make COVID-19 testing free for all Texans, no matter your insurance situation. I think we've all been gratified to see the response of the private sector with Abbott Laboratories coming on board with a new testing equipment that can confirm or negate the presence of the virus in a matter of minutes, and with the response to the demand for ventilators and the like. But we are. This is how we demonstrate who we are as a nation, and we really show our best when we pull together. But making sure we provide for the health concerns of all Texans certainly is a priority.
That's wonderful. We've heard a lot of discussion about the provision that is directed at sending direct payments to Americans. You touched on that in your opening remarks in terms of the potential amounts and things of that nature. Do you have a sense of when families might actually receive these payments? You know, you mentioned it's first of the month. It's time to pay rent. Can you touch a little bit on the timing elements if you're aware?
Yeah, the Secretary Mnuchin said he'd like to get this done in 2 weeks, and that would have been from the date the bill was signed, as we discussed earlier last Friday. Now he's saying 2 to 3 weeks, but I'm sure it will be welcome, particularly by those who are not receiving any income at all presently. And an individual making up to $75,000 will receive a $1,200 check. A couple making up to $150,000 will receive $2,400 and an additional $500 for each child under the age of 17. And so this is designed to throw a lifeline to folks who need money to pay their rent, to put food on the table and pay bills when they may literally have been living from paycheck to paycheck. This is going to be implemented through the IRS and based on your 2019 or 2018 tax return, and they'll use direct deposit wherever possible. And so within the next 3 weeks, hopefully that money will be there.
I'm sure that'll come as a relief to many of us. Let's shift this discussion to business recovery. Obviously, most of the folks on this call are members of the Houston business community, and we know that businesses in Houston are hurting right now. We also know that the intent of this legislation is to support businesses up and through this recovery period. And ultimately help them survive and thrive during once we get past this. So we have a lot of questions that have come in from our members that are regarding the technical requirements, technical elements of receiving this assistance from SBA, and then some questions on the other side regarding the loan forgiveness and those elements. What is the we're not going to be able to answer all those specific questions, unfortunately, today, although we can certainly be helpful as this unfolds, as can your office. But what is the best way for each business to figure out the specifics in terms of what for their individual situation? Where should their first call, their first stop be?
Well, my suggestion would be, in addition to the information that's supplied by the Greater Houston Partnership, or that can be supplied by my office, that the next call should be with your bank or your credit union, somebody with whom you've already have an established business relationship. What they will probably tell you is that they just got some of the guidance from Treasury on how this will be administered, and now we're shooting for applications to be processed as soon as this Friday. But there have already been questions that have arisen, as you might imagine, about how to do this. And when you're trying to get this much done this fast, there are bound to be some bumps, but we're going to ride that out together. But the goal was to minimize the amount of bureaucracy you have to deal with. And so it's those who've dealt with the Small Business Administration. This isn't really done through the SBA, but it is done through SBA certified lenders. And so the goal is to get money to the local level to people who already have an existing relationship with businesses. And so as we discussed, one of the biggest goals of this is to allow these small businesses to continue to pay their employees if possible. And if it's not, then we've beefed up the unemployment insurance compensation provisions for them to get some relief. But if you do make payments for the next 8 weeks to keep your employees on the payroll, and for the amount of overhead that you pay, your rent and other operations, you will receive a forgivable loan. Up to $10 million is the maximum amount. And you can receive an advance of up to $10,000 on that. So this is in my experience, there is no precedent for getting money to the people who need it this fast. And again, we'll work through the bumps in the road together, but that's how that will work. There's a cap of 500 employees for this, but we also have expanded some of these same elements to the airlines, which of course we have major airlines in Texas, headquartered here and operating out of here, and a lot of people connected with that industry. And there's also a third issue that has to do with larger employers, where they can literally go and apply for a loan from the Federal Reserve, from a lending facility that they're in the process of setting up. And there's been almost $500 billion allocated to that. And the goal is to let the Fed make those loans, lever that up, and provide even more liquidity and more of a stimulus to the economy.
That's great. We received a question from a small business owner in Sugar Land, and related to the employer payroll tax. The question is, how does the CARES Act address the employer payroll tax issue, and what type of relief can small business expect in this regard as a result of CARES?
Well, I know cash is king, particularly in a time like this. So what the CARES Act does is it allows employers to defer the employer portion of the payroll taxes until the end of 2020. These taxes are owed in 2 equal payments then at the end of 2021 and 2022. So hopefully that will help some of the cash flow crunch that you are experiencing. This will allow employers to keep cash on hand, obviously, and prioritize paying their employees and staying afloat the best way they can until we get through this crisis together.
Sounds good. So obviously here in Houston, we pay particular attention to the oil and gas industry. And on March 6th, we began seeing a pretty precipitous decline in oil prices, which obviously has a huge impact on Houston's economy. So we've received a lot of questions from members that are either directly employed by oil and gas, or either part of their supply chain, or the subcontractor group of businesses. And so when you take the decline in oil prices and pair it with this COVID-19 crisis, taking these two issues together, and what is the impact on Texas and perhaps Houston specifically? We're going to face a tough road ahead. So what is your outlook on the Texas economy, let's say over the next 9-12 months?
Well, we knew that oil prices were going lower and making it harder for many of our highly levered companies to continue to pay their bills or get access to credit. But the Saudis, conspiring with the Russians, have now glutting the global oil markets and driving those prices even lower. So this is really insult to the coronavirus injury and making life doubly hard, I think, for folks in the oil and gas industry. And that has not escaped my attention. Senator Cruz and I worked with 13 other senators. We sent a letter to the Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia telling him that he had benefited from our support for our alliance with Saudi Arabia when our shared interests were involved, but that this was irresponsible conduct, and I'm sure was unintended. We gave him the benefit of the doubt. Its negative impact on the U.S. energy sector. And we then subsequently had a conference call with the Saudi ambassador, who delivered a very harsh message And of course, the kingdom depends on the United States for their security, and they understand that. And my hope is that we got their attention. I've now had 2 separate conversations with the Secretary of Energy, Dan Brulette, and he tells me that the message has been received, and it is working, it's helping provide some leverage. So I know the president also, I think it was yesterday, talked to the Russians, and the hope is to get the Russians and the Saudis back to the table and negotiate some acceptable outcome here that will stabilize oil prices, because right now what we're experiencing is a huge drop in global demand because businesses have been shuttered and there's just not the demand, and we've got a surplus of oil and no place to put it. The Secretary of Energy is also looking at the Strategic Petroleum Reserve as a place to store some of that excess crude until the economy picks up again. But you're right, this is a double whammy for people in the oil and gas industry and for our state, because it's the energy sector is such an important employer, and Texas oil is so important to the geopolitics of the world.
Let's turn our attention now to further actions that Congress might take in response to COVID-19. So there's been a lot of chatter coming out of Washington about a potential COVID-4 package. We've received a number of questions from our members asking specifically about what role infrastructure might play within that 4th package. And so I would ask you specifically about the infrastructure component of a potential next package, and then more broadly ask you, what would you like to see that package look like?
Well, as I said, during a time of national emergency, when we are literally on a war footing to beat this virus and to defeat the negative impact on our economy, we're not going to be paying a lot of attention to pinching pennies or deficits and debt. But obviously those are long-term consequences to this spending that we are going to have to deal with at some point. But I think, more to my point, I don't see this as an opportunity to pass partisan or ideologically tinged legislation in order to advance one's political standing or to help one's constituents from that partisan or ideological standpoint. This is a problem that needs to be solved, and our nation has always pulled together after things like 9/11, after the 2008 Great Recession, and now should pull together without regard to partisanship or ideology and help each other get through this, and we will do that. But you're right, there is discussion, chatter is always prevalent in Washington, D.C. about what's the next step. And for myself, what I would like to do is see how this 3rd installment is actually implemented, because I'm sure, as I said, there's going to be mistakes, there's going to be things we're going to need to fix, there are going to be gaps that need to be filled, and that ought to be our first priority. But having said that, infrastructure is always something that we have said that we should be doing. And if this provides us an opportunity to do so in a responsible way, I certainly would embrace that. But I don't, obviously infrastructure spending is more of a long-term stimulus to the economy and provides jobs, and that's great. We actually have some proposals to finance it, which is always the hardest part. But that is being discussed, and the president's embraced it. If we can get that done, I think that's great. But my focus, at least in the near term, is going to be on how do we make sure that the $2 trillion+ bill that we just passed actually is implemented, and does it work the way we intended, and are there gaps that need to be filled?
Well, I think your message on addressing the issues at hand and leaving partisanship aside is one that's certainly welcome during these times. We appreciate that. I know that that we do have to wrap up because you've got another engagement that you have to hop to. But is there a final message that you would leave with the Houston business community? Just use this as an opportunity to talk directly to those that are in the midst of a real crisis, and what message would you have for them?
Well, Taylor, we in the Houston area, this is not our first rodeo. This is not our first crisis. And I remember with great clarity after Hurricane Harvey, when this region pulled together, neighbor helping neighbor, Texan helping Texan. We worked, the entire Texas delegation pulled together, and we were able to secure $30 billion in funding, not just to deal with the recovery from Hurricane Harvey, but to build infrastructure to mitigate against future threats. So we know how to do this, and we know how to work together to get things done. But I know that this is a time of hardship for many people, particularly those who don't have any income right now. And we've talked about how we've tried to throw them a lifeline and to provide secondary support in the way of unemployment insurance compensation. But I've never seen anything like this. I hope never to see anything like this again. But you can tell that all of the members of Congress, including the 96 people in the Senate that voted on it, it was unanimously passed. And that was the only reason it wasn't 100-0 is because we had several people in self-quarantine and one senator tested positive for the virus, or it would have been 100-0 in my opinion. So I know this is tough, but we're in this together, and we've been through tough times before, and we will get through this stronger on the other side. So please make sure you continue to communicate with me and my staff. We work hand in glove with the Greater Houston Partnership, one of the most outstanding business organizations I know of. And together we will find our way through this. We'll defeat this virus thanks to great scientists and great who identified not only a vaccine, but also identified drugs that can be used to treat and cure the disease, just as we have done for other epidemics of this nature. So we'll get this together, and thank you for having me. And we look forward to staying fully engaged with all of you.
Absolutely. Thank you, Senator Cornyn, for joining us. Thank you. Please give our best to Mrs. Cornyn, as you guys I know are still working hard in Washington, and we appreciate everything that you're doing for Texas and for the Houston business community, and we look forward to continuing to work with you as this all unfolds. Thank you so much.
Thanks a lot. Godspeed.
And with that, Carrie, I'll turn it back over to you.
Great, thank you, Taylor. And for our audience, you may be leaving us right now, but I just want to share some additional information for you as you leave. We do have several resources that Taylor mentioned at the beginning that if you'd like an opportunity to just snapshot this screen, or we will have this information shared in our partnerships daily briefings that we do send out every morning. You can get these links as well. But we do encourage you to visit our recovery page now that is brand new, the Greater Houston Business Recovery Center. And as always, we continue to provide information, updates daily. One thing to note as well is tomorrow we will have a webinar, a moderated panel with lenders to talk about the CARE Act, specifically the payroll provision. And you'd like to join us tomorrow at noon to 1. We will have another webinar to speak directly to some of those small business loan assistance issues that many of the questions you had asked today we were not able to get to, but that will be addressed tomorrow in our lender panel. Thank you again so much for joining us. I will leave this page open for those that want to remain on the site. And we have captured your questions in the chat and Q&A, and we will be getting back to you, each of you, to address those. Thank you so much.